After my spouse's death, I kept quiet about the cottage and $500,000 in the account. A month later, my daughter announced, "Clear out the house, we're selling it." I nodded and pulled out the will. Her face went white as snow when she read, "My name is Margaret, and I'm 62 years old." I never thought I'd be sitting here telling this story to strangers on the internet. But sometimes life pushes you to places you never imagined you'd go. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can set you free, even when it hurts more than keeping quiet ever did. It all started 3 months ago when my husband Robert passed away. We'd been married for 38 years. 38 years of what I thought was a good life, a solid marriage. The kind of partnership that weathers storms and celebrates victories together. Robert was 65 when his heart gave out. Just like that. One minute he was watering his tomatoes in the backyard, humming some old Eagles song. And the next minute, our neighbor Mrs. Patterson was pounding on my kitchen door, her face white as a sheet, telling me to call 911. The funeral was everything you'd expect. Our daughter Jessica flew in from California with her husband Brad and their twin boys, Tommy and Jake. They're 14 now, tall and gangly like their grandfather was at that age. Jessica had always been Robert's little princess, even at 35 years old. She could do no wrong in his eyes. When she was 16 and crashed his precious Mustang into the Hendersons' mailbox, he just laughed it off and said she was learning. When she dropped out of her master's program to follow some boy to Los Angeles, Robert sent her money for the first 6 months until she got on her feet. I loved my daughter, don't get me wrong. But I also knew her in ways that Robert never seemed to see. Jessica had this way of looking at situations and immediately calculating what was in it for her. She was smart, beautiful, charming when she needed to be, but there was something cold underneath all that charm. Something that made me feel like I was walking on eggshells whenever we had serious conversations about money or responsibility. After the service, everyone gathered at our house on Maple Street. It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch that Robert and I bought when Jessica was just 2 years old. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. The mortgage had been paid off for 10 years, and Robert had always been proud of that. "A man's home is his castle," he'd say, even though our castle had a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and wallpaper in the kitchen that was probably older than some of our neighbors. I remember standing in that kitchen during the reception, watching Jessica move through the rooms like she was taking inventory. She'd pick up little things. Robert's collection of baseball cards, the antique clock that belonged to his mother, our wedding china that we only used twice a year. She wasn't being obvious about it, but I noticed. Mothers always notice. "Mom, you holding up okay?" she asked me that afternoon, coming up behind me while I was washing dishes. Her voice had that concerned daughter tone, but her eyes were scanning the contents of our china cabinet. "I'm managing, honey," I told her, drying my hands on the dish towel that Robert had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. It had little sunflowers on it, and the edges were starting to fray, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. "Good, good. You know, Brad and I were talking, and we think maybe you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house all by yourself. Have you thought about what you want to do? I mean, long term?" I turned to look at her then. Jessica was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, even after a day of crying. She looked successful, put together, like the kind of daughter any mother would be proud of. So why did her question make me feel like she was circling me like a vulture? "I haven't really thought about anything long-term yet, Jess. Your father's only been gone a week." Of course. I just meant, eventually. This house is so much work, and the property taxes alone must be eating you alive. Dad never was great with money management. That stung. Robert had worked 2 jobs for 15 years to pay off this house early. He'd managed our money just fine, thank you very much. But I didn't say that. I just nodded and changed the subject. Jessica and her family stayed for 4 days after the funeral. During that time, I noticed she spent a lot of time going through Robert's papers, asking questions about our finances, our insurance policies, our estate planning. She used that phrase a lot, estate planning, like we were the Rockefellers instead of a retired machinist and a part-time bookkeeper. "Mom, where did Dad keep all the important documents?" she asked on the 3rd day. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and she had a yellow legal pad in front of her covered with notes. You know, the will, insurance papers, bank statements, that kind of thing. "In his desk in the den," I told her. "Top drawer on the right side." "Mind if I take a look? I just want to make sure everything's in order for you. I know dealing with all this paperwork is the last thing you want to do right now." I should have said something then. I should have told her that I was perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. But grief makes you tired in ways you don't expect. Everything felt like it required more energy than I had. So I just waved her toward the den and went back to staring at the coffee cup in my hands. That evening, after Jessica had spent several hours going through Robert's desk, she came to find me in the living room. I was sitting in his recliner, something I'd never done when he was alive, trying to figure out how to work the remote control for the television. Everything felt different without him there to explain which buttons did what. "Mom, I've been looking through Dad's papers, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about your financial situation." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Well, from what I can see, Dad left you in pretty good shape. The house is paid off, there's some money in savings, and the life insurance should cover most of your expenses for a while. But honey, maintaining this property is going to eat into that nest egg pretty quickly. The roof needs work. The furnace is ancient. And don't even get me started on what it's going to cost to keep up the yard work that Dad always did himself." I looked around the living room. The carpet was worn in spots. And yes, there was a water stain on the ceiling from when the upstairs toilet had overflowed 2 winters ago. But it was my home. Our home. "I can hire someone to help with the yard work," I said. Jessica sat down on the couch across from me, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "Mom, I love you, and I want what's best for you. But I also want you to be realistic. You're 62 years old. You're going to want to travel, enjoy your retirement, maybe move somewhere warmer. This house is just going to tie you down. I like it here. All my friends are here. The church is here." I know. But think about it this way. If you sold the house, you could get a nice little condo somewhere, maybe closer to us in California. Wouldn't you like to see the boys more often? They're growing up so fast. That was a low blow, and she knew it. I'd only seen my grandsons 3 times in the past 2 years, and it broke my heart every time they left. "I'll think about it," I said, because I didn't know what else to say. Jessica smiled then, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's all I'm asking, Mom. Just think about it." The next morning, they left for California. Jessica hugged me at the door and told me to call her if I needed anything at all. Brad shook my hand and said something polite about taking care of myself. The boys, bless their hearts, seemed genuinely sad to leave their grandmother behind. After their rental car disappeared around the corner, I went back into the house and stood in the hallway, listening to the silence. It was different from the comfortable quiet Robert and I used to share. This silence felt heavy, expectant, like it was waiting for something to happen. I walked into the den and looked at Robert's desk. Jessica had left everything neat and organized, but I could tell she'd been through every drawer, every file folder. A yellow sticky note was attached to the top of a manila folder labeled Insurance. In Jessica's handwriting, it said, "Mom, everything's here if you need it. Love you." But as I stood there, something nagged at me. Robert had always been secretive about certain things, not in a suspicious way, but in the way that men of his generation sometimes were about family finances. He handled the bills, made the investments, dealt with the bank. I knew the basics, but I'd never paid attention to the details. Now, looking at his desk, I remembered something. 2 years ago, Robert had driven up to his sister's cabin in the mountains for a weekend. When he came back, he'd been unusually excited about something. But when I asked him about it, he just said he'd had a good weekend and changed the subject. A week later, I'd noticed him making several trips to the bank, carrying a briefcase I'd never seen before. I'd asked him about it once, and he just smiled and said he was taking care of some things for his sister Helen, who was getting older and needed help managing her affairs. Helen lived in Phoenix now, in an assisted living facility, and we rarely talked to her except for birthday cards and Christmas calls. Standing in Robert's den, I realized that Jessica had been very thorough in her investigation of our finances. But she'd only looked at the obvious things: the checking account, the savings account, the insurance policies. She'd looked at the will, which left everything to me, as expected. But Robert had always been more complicated than he appeared on the surface. I sat down in his desk chair and opened the bottom drawer, the one Jessica had probably barely glanced at because it was full of what looked like random junk. Old warranties for appliances we no longer owned, instruction manuals for tools, expired coupons, and warranty cards. But underneath all of that, I found something that made my heart skip a beat. A small silver key, attached to a keychain that said Secure Storage Solutions, with an address I didn't recognize. I held that little silver key in my palm for a long time, turning it over and over, like it might reveal its secrets if I just looked at it hard enough. The keychain was one of those cheap plastic ones they give you at banks or storage facilities, nothing fancy. But something about finding it hidden under all that junk in Robert's desk made my hands shake. Secure Storage Solutions was located on the other side of town, in one of those industrial areas where you don't go unless you have specific business there. I'd driven past the facility 100 times over the years without ever really noticing it. Just another beige building with a fence around it and a sign that promised climate-controlled units and 24-hour security. It took me 3 days to work up the courage to drive over there. 3 days of carrying that key in my purse, taking it out at random moments, wondering what Robert had been hiding from me. The logical part of my brain kept telling me it was probably nothing important. Maybe some old Christmas decorations he'd stored away, or tools he'd wanted to keep but didn't have room for in the garage. But the wife part of my brain, the part that had been married to Robert for 38 years, knew better. Robert never did anything without a reason. He was the kind of man who labeled everything, who kept receipts for purchases he'd made 10 years ago, who wrote down the mileage every time he put gas in his car. If he'd gotten a storage unit and hidden the key, there was something in there he didn't want me to know about. The morning I finally decided to go, I woke up at 5:30 and couldn't get back to sleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up through the window over the sink. The house felt different in the early morning quiet. lonely, but also expectant, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I drove to Secure Storage Solutions just after 9 o'clock, when I figured the office would be open, but before the place got busy with people moving things in and out of their units. The woman behind the counter was probably in her 30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of practiced smile that people in customer service jobs develop over time. "Can I help you?" she asked. I pulled the key out of my purse and set it on the counter between us. My husband passed away recently, and I found this in his things. I think he had a unit here. Her expression immediately softened. "Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Let me look that up for you." She typed something into her computer, then looked at the key more closely. "Unit 68. Yes, here it is. Robert Morrison, right?" "That's right." "Okay. I'm going to need to see some ID and a copy of the death certificate to verify that you're authorized to access the unit." I'd brought both things, somehow knowing I'd need them. She made copies of everything and had me sign a form, then handed me a printed map of the facility. "Unit 68 is in Building C, about halfway down on the left side. Just follow the yellow line on the road, and you can't miss it." My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the map. "Thank you. Take your time, honey. And again, I'm really sorry about your husband." Building C was exactly where she said it would be. The storage units looked like garage doors, each one with a number painted in black block letters. 68 was between a unit that looked like it was full of furniture covered in moving blankets and another one that was closed and locked tight. I stood in front of Unit 68 for a full 5 minutes before I could bring myself to put the key in the lock. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The lock turned easily, and the door rolled up with a metallic rattling sound that seemed to echo through the whole building. The unit wasn't very big, maybe 10 feet by 8 feet. But what was inside made me grab onto the door frame to keep from falling over. There were boxes, lots of boxes, all neatly labeled in Robert's careful handwriting. Helen's papers, Helen's photos, Helen's financial documents. But that wasn't what made my knees go weak. Against the back wall was a filing cabinet I'd never seen before. And next to that was a small desk with a computer on it, also unfamiliar. But what really got my attention was the metal box sitting on top of the desk. The kind of fireproof safe that people keep important documents in. I walked into the unit like I was walking through a dream. Everything smelled like cardboard and dust. But underneath that was the faint scent of Robert's cologne. Old Spice, the same brand he'd worn for as long as I'd known him. The first box I opened was labeled Helen's Photos. Inside were hundreds of pictures, some in albums and some loose. Pictures of Robert and Helen as children, pictures of their parents, pictures from family gatherings I remembered attending over the years. Nothing surprising there. But the box labeled Helen's Financial Documents was a different story entirely. Inside were bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, and insurance policies. All in Helen's name, but with Robert listed as the beneficiary or executor. As I looked through the papers, a picture started to emerge that I couldn't quite believe. Helen wasn't just Robert's sister. She was rich. Really rich. The bank statements showed accounts with balances that made my eyes water. The investment portfolios were worth more money than I'd ever imagined anyone in our family having. And there were property deeds for not just one cabin in the mountains, but 3 different properties in Colorado, Arizona, and Montana. I sat down hard on one of the boxes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. How had Robert never mentioned any of this? How had Helen never mentioned it? Every time we talked to her over the years, she'd complained about being on a fixed income, about how expensive everything was getting, about how hard it was to make ends meet on Social Security. But according to these documents, Helen was worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million. My hands were shaking as I opened the metal box on the desk. Inside was a manila envelope with my name written on it in Robert's handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter, folded in half, and a smaller key. The letter was dated just 6 months before Robert died. "Margaret," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found my little secret. I hope you can forgive me for not telling you about Helen's situation while I was alive. But she made me promise to keep it between us until she passed away." I had to stop reading and take several deep breaths. The storage unit suddenly felt too small, too airless. Helen never had children, as you know, and she never married after that disaster with Frank back in the 70s, about 5 years ago. She started getting worried about what would happen to her money when she died. She didn't trust banks completely, and she was afraid that if she left everything to charity, it would just get eaten up in administrative costs. The letter went on to explain that Helen had asked Robert to help her set up a plan for her estate. She wanted to leave most of her money to Jessica and the boys, but she also wanted to make sure that I was taken care of if anything happened to Robert. "The cabin you know about, the one in Colorado where I used to go fishing, that's yours now. Free and clear. But there's also a bank account that Helen set up specifically for you. The account number and routing information are in the safe deposit box at First National Bank. The key is with this letter." I looked at the small key in my hand. My vision was blurry with tears, and I had to wipe my eyes to keep reading. "There's $500,000 in that account, Margaret. Helen wanted you to have it as a thank you for all the years you made me happy, and as insurance in case Jessica turns out to be the kind of person we both worry she might be." My heart stopped. Jessica. Robert and Helen had talked about Jessica, had worried about her. I know our daughter, and I love her. But I also know that she's always been more interested in what she can get than what she can give. Helen sees it too. We've both watched Jessica over the years, and we're both concerned that if she knew about Helen's money, she'd start circling like a vulture, waiting for Helen to die. The letter went on to explain that Helen was still alive, still in the assisted living facility in Phoenix, but that she'd transferred most of her assets into trusts and accounts that would become active after her death. The $500,000 in my account was from Helen's own money, given as a gift while she was still alive to avoid estate taxes. I'm telling you this now because I want you to be prepared. When Helen passes away, Jessica is going to inherit a substantial amount of money. But I also want you to be protected, financially and emotionally. Don't let anyone pressure you into making decisions about the house or your future until you've had time to grieve and think clearly. The letter was signed simply, "Love, Robert," with a postscript that made me laugh and cry at the same time. P.S. Helen says to tell you that you were always her favorite daughter-in-law, even though you were her only daughter-in-law. I sat in that storage unit for over an hour, reading the letter 3 times and looking through more of the boxes. There were copies of all the legal documents, explanations of how the trusts worked, even a handwritten note from Helen expressing her gratitude for the way I'd always made Robert happy. But the thing that stuck with me most was what Robert had written about Jessica, about how they'd both been worried about her circling like a vulture. As I locked up the storage unit and drove home, I thought about the conversation Jessica and I had had after the funeral, about how quickly she'd started talking about selling the house, about how she'd gone through Robert's papers so thoroughly, about the way she'd looked at me when she talked about my financial situation, Had she been trying to figure out how much money I had so she could calculate how much she might inherit when I died? The thought made me feel sick, but it also made me feel something else. Suspicious. I spent the rest of that day at the kitchen table with all of Robert's papers spread out in front of me, looking at everything with new eyes. The will that Jessica had read so carefully left everything to me, just as she'd said. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that everything was a lot more than it appeared to be. The house on Maple Street was worth maybe $200,000. Our savings and checking accounts totaled about $30,000. The life insurance payout would be $50,000. To someone looking at those numbers, it would seem like I was comfortable, but not wealthy. Certainly not wealthy enough to be worth waiting around for. But now I knew about the cottage in Colorado, which was worth at least $300,000 according to the property records in Robert's files. And I knew about the $500,000 sitting in an account at First National Bank. I was actually pretty well off. Not rich, but secure in a way that would let me live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about money. And Jessica had no idea. The next morning, I drove to First National Bank with the small key clutched in my hand like a talisman. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything I'd discovered. The safe deposit box was registered under both Robert's and my name, which meant I had every right to access it. But my hand still shook as I signed the access log. The bank employee, a young man named David, who couldn't have been more than 25, led me down to the vault in the basement. The walls were lined with small metal doors, each one secured with 2 locks. He used his key in one lock, I used mine in the other, and the door swung open to reveal a narrow metal box. Inside were more documents, but also something I hadn't expected: a handwritten journal in Robert's careful script. The first entry was dated 3 years ago. Helen called today. She's getting scared about her money, about what will happen when she's gone. I told her not to worry, that Margaret and I would make sure everything goes to the right people. But I'm starting to worry too. Jessica called yesterday asking about our estate planning again. She's never shown that kind of interest in our finances before. I flipped through more pages, reading entries that painted a picture of Robert's growing concern about our daughter's motives. Entries about conversations he'd had with Helen, about Jessica's phone calls that always seemed to circle back to money, about the way she'd started treating our occasional visits to Phoenix like fact-finding missions. One entry, dated just 8 months before Robert died, made my blood run cold. Jessica asked Helen directly about her will yesterday when we called for her birthday. Right there on the phone, in front of all of us. Helen handled it well, said she was leaving everything to charity. But I could see Jessica's face change. She's calculating something. Margaret doesn't see it, or doesn't want to see it. But Jessica is waiting for us to die. I closed the journal and sat in the small, windowless room for a long time. The fluorescent light overhead hummed softly, and I could hear muffled conversations from the bank lobby upstairs. But down here in the vault, it felt like I was completely alone with the truth about my family. When I finally drove home, I felt like I was seeing everything with new eyes. The house that Jessica wanted me to sell so badly. The way she'd rushed to go through Robert's papers. The casual way she'd dismissed his money management skills while simultaneously trying to catalog every asset we owned. I was still processing all of this when my phone rang 2 weeks later. It was Jessica, calling from California with news that made my heart skip a beat. "Mom, I have some sad news. Aunt Helen passed away yesterday." Helen, the woman who'd given me $500,000 as a gift, who'd worried about Jessica's motives, who trusted Robert to handle her affairs, gone. "Oh no," I managed to say. "How?" "Peacefully, in her sleep. The facility called this morning. Mom, I know this is hard, but we need to talk about arrangements. I've already called the funeral home in Phoenix, and they're handling the cremation. Helen left specific instructions that she didn't want a service. Of course she had. Helen had always been practical, even about death. But Mom, here's the thing. I've been in touch with Helen's lawyer, and apparently she left quite a bit of money. More than anyone realized. And get this, most of it's going to our family." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're talking about serious money, Mom. Like life-changing money. The lawyer is still working through all the details, but it looks like Helen was actually wealthy. Really wealthy. She had investments, properties, accounts that none of us knew about. That's wonderful, honey." I tried to keep my voice steady. "It is. But Mom, this changes everything about your situation. I mean, once Helen's estate is settled, you're going to have more money than you know what to do with, which makes keeping that big house even more ridiculous." There it was. The real reason for the call. "Jessica, I haven't even processed the fact that Helen is gone, and you're already talking about my house." I know. But Mom, I'm thinking about your future. With Helen's inheritance, you could buy a beautiful condo anywhere you want. Maybe one of those luxury retirement communities with golf courses and activities. You deserve to enjoy your golden years, not spend them worrying about roof repairs and yard work. I thought about the cottage in Colorado that was already mine, about the $500,000 sitting in my bank account that Jessica knew nothing about Robert's journal entries documenting his growing suspicions about our daughter's motives. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Mom, I was thinking maybe Brad and I should come out for a visit next month. You know, to help you start planning. Maybe we could look at some real estate listings, get an idea of what the house is worth in today's market." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and realized that Robert had been right to be worried. Jessica wasn't calling to comfort me about Helen's death or to share her grief about losing her great-aunt. She was calling to start the process of convincing me to sell my house so she could get her hands on what she thought would be her inheritance when I died. Except she had no idea what she was really dealing with. Over the next 2 weeks, I had 3 more conversations with Jessica about my future plans. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Expressions of concern for my well-being, followed by increasingly detailed suggestions about selling the house, followed by casual questions about my finances. "Mom, have you thought about setting up a trust or anything like that? I mean, with Helen's money coming, you'll want to make sure everything is organized for tax purposes." "Mom, Brad was saying maybe we should get you connected with a financial advisor, someone who can help you manage all these new assets." "Mom, I've been looking at some retirement communities online, and there are some really beautiful places. Much nicer than anything you could afford before Helen's inheritance." Each conversation made me more certain that Robert's suspicions had been justified. Jessica wasn't thinking about my happiness or my comfort. She was thinking about maximizing the inheritance she expected to receive when I died. The breaking point came exactly 1 month after Helen's funeral. Jessica called on a Thursday evening, just as I was finishing my dinner. "Mom, great news! Brad and I booked flights for next week. We're coming to help you get organized." "Organized for what?" "For your new life. I've been doing research, and I think I've found the perfect place for you. It's a senior community about an hour outside Phoenix, not far from where Helen lived. Beautiful weather year-round, golf course, pool, activities. And Mom, the best part is that they have a waiting list. But one of the condos just became available. If we move fast, you could have your pick of units. My stomach dropped. Jessica, I never said I wanted to move to Arizona. I know, but just think about it. You'd be close to where Helen spent her last years, and it's only a 4-hour flight from us in California. You could see the boys all the time. What about my friends here, my church, my whole life? Mom, you're starting a whole new chapter. This is your chance to live somewhere beautiful and warm, where you don't have to worry about snow or yard work or any of that stuff. And financially, it makes perfect sense. You can sell the house for a good price, use part of Helen's inheritance to buy the condo outright, and invest the rest. She had it all figured out. Every detail. Where I would live, how I would spend my money, what I would do with the rest of my life. The only problem was that none of it was what I wanted. Jessica, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not selling my house. I am not moving to Arizona. And I am not making any major life decisions until I've had time to properly grieve your father and process everything that's happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Mom, I think you're being emotional and not thinking clearly. This is a huge opportunity, and if you wait too long, you'll miss it. Then I'll miss it. Mom, Jessica, I said no. Please respect that. Another silence, this one longer and colder. Fine. But Brad and I are still coming next week. We've already bought the tickets, and I think it would be good for us to spend some time together as a family. Maybe once you see some of the options available to you, you'll feel differently. After I hung up, I realized that Jessica wasn't planning to visit to spend time with me. She was planning to visit to pressure me in person, to wear me down until I agreed to sell the house and move somewhere that would be more convenient for her to manage my affairs. Robert's words from his journal came back to me. Jessica is waiting for us to die. But I wasn't dead yet, and I was about to remind my daughter of that fact. I spent the weekend thinking about everything Robert had written, everything Helen had planned, everything Jessica had said and done since Robert's funeral. By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called Helen's lawyer in Phoenix, introduced myself, and asked him to send me copies of all the documents related to Helen's estate and the trusts she'd set up. Then I called my own lawyer here in town, a man named Frank Patterson, who'd handled our wills and various legal matters over the years. Frank, I need to make some changes to my estate planning, and I need to do it quickly. Of course, Margaret. What kind of changes are we talking about? I want to set up a trust that will protect my assets and ensure that they're distributed according to my wishes, not according to what someone else thinks is best for me. That sounds reasonable. When would you like to meet? Today, if possible. When Jessica and Brad arrived the following Thursday, I was ready for them. They came armed with printouts, real estate listings, retirement community brochures, financial planning worksheets that Brad had apparently spent hours preparing. Jessica had her laptop with her, and within 10 minutes of walking through my front door, she had it open on the kitchen table, showing me virtual tours of condominiums in Arizona. "Look at this one, Mom," she said, turning the screen toward me. "It has a view of the mountains, and the kitchen is completely updated. Much nicer than this old place." This old place. My home for 33 years. The place where I'd raised my daughter, where Robert and I had shared our lives, where every room held memories that money couldn't buy. "It's very nice," I said politely. Brad was walking through the house with his phone, taking pictures. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind, but I'm documenting some of the issues we'll need to address before we put the house on the market. The realtor will want to see these." What realtor? Jessica looked up from her laptop. Mom, I took the liberty of calling a few agents while we were planning this trip, just to get an idea of what we're working with. Nothing formal, obviously, but I wanted to be prepared. Nothing formal. Yet. I've got estimates from 3 different agents, Brad said, pulling a folder out of his briefcase. Based on comparable sales in the neighborhood, we're looking at somewhere between $180,000 and $220,000, depending on how much work we want to put into it before listing. I looked at the papers he handed me. Detailed analyses of recent home sales, photographs of houses that looked nothing like mine, spreadsheets showing projected costs for necessary improvements. This is very thorough, I said. Brad's great with this kind of thing, Jessica said proudly. He sold his mom's house after she moved to assisted living, so he knows the process inside and out. The process, like my entire life, was just a process to be managed and optimized. They spent the morning showing me numbers and pictures and plans. Jessica had researched moving companies that specialized in senior relocations. Brad had calculated the tax implications of selling the house. They'd even looked into shipping my car to Arizona versus selling it and buying a new one there. The great thing about the senior community is that they have transportation services, Jessica explained. You might not even need a car at all. Think about how freeing that would be. Freeing. Like losing my independence was something to celebrate. At lunch, they started talking about timelines. If we can get the house listed by the end of next month, we should be able to close before the holidays, Brad said. That would give you time to get settled in Arizona before winter, which is really the best time to be there anyway. And I can fly back to help you pack, Jessica added. We'll make sure everything important gets properly taken care of. Everything important. I wondered what my daughter would consider important enough to save from a lifetime of memories. I've been thinking about what you both said, I told them after lunch. And you're right that I need to make some decisions about my future. Jessica's face lit up. I'm so glad you're being open to this, Mom. But before I make any major changes, I want to make sure I understand my financial situation completely. Of course, that's smart. So, I've been going through all of your father's papers more carefully, and I've discovered some things I didn't know about before. Jessica and Brad exchanged glances. What kind of things? Jessica asked. Well, for instance, did you know that Helen left me the cottage in Colorado? The cabin where Dad used to go fishing. I thought that was just part of the general estate. No, she left it specifically to me. It's mine, free and clear. Brad pulled out his phone and started typing. That's great, Margaret. Mountain properties are really hot right now. We could probably get a good price for it, especially if it's in decent condition. We could probably get a good price for it, like it was already our property to sell. Actually, I was thinking about keeping it. Maybe spending summers there. Jessica frowned. Mom, that doesn't make any sense. You've never liked camping or fishing or any of that outdoor stuff. And maintaining a second property is going to be a nightmare, especially one that's hours away from everything. It's not hours away from everything. It's about 90 minutes from Denver, which is still too far if something goes wrong. Mom, be practical. You could sell the cabin and the house, buy the condo in Arizona, and have enough money left over to travel wherever you want. I nodded thoughtfully. You know what? You're absolutely right. I do need to be practical. Both of them smiled, thinking they'd won. Which is why I've decided to stay right here in my own home, where I'm comfortable and happy, and keep the cabin as a retreat property. The smiles faded. Mom, I really think you're not seeing the big picture here, Jessica said carefully. Actually, I think I'm seeing it more clearly than I have in months. I got up from the table and walked to the kitchen counter, where I'd left a manila envelope earlier that morning. Inside were copies of all the documents Frank Patterson had prepared for me, along with some other papers I thought they might find interesting. Since we're talking about being practical and planning for the future, I thought you should see this. I handed Jessica the first document, my new will. She read it quickly, her expression changing as she processed what she was seeing. Mom, this leaves everything to charity. Not everything. You'll still inherit some personal items and family heirlooms. But yes, the bulk of my estate will go to organizations that I believe in. Brad was reading over her shoulder now. Margaret, I think you might want to reconsider this. I mean, what about Jessica? What about the boys? What about them? Well, they're your family. Shouldn't they benefit from your estate? I handed Jessica the second document, a copy of Helen's will and the trust documents that her lawyer had sent me. Actually, they will benefit. Helen left quite a bit of money to Jessica and the boys, just like you said. More than enough to secure their future. Jessica was scanning the document, her face getting paler by the minute. This says I inherit $100,000, and the boys get $50,000 each when they turn 25. That's right. But Mom, you said Helen was wealthy. You said there was serious money. There was. About $2.3 million, according to her lawyer. Then where's the rest of it? I handed her the third document, a copy of Robert's letter to me, along with bank statements showing the $500,000 account that was already in my name. Jessica read the letter twice, her hands shaking. When she looked up at me, her face was white with shock and something that looked like rage. You've known about this money for weeks, and you didn't tell me? Your father asked me not to tell you until I was sure you could handle it maturely. Handle it maturely? Mom, we've been trying to help you plan your future. No, you've been trying to plan my future for me. There's a difference. Brad was doing math on his phone. Wait a minute. If Helen left you $500,000, and you have the cottage, and you have this house, plus whatever Robert left you. Margaret, you're actually pretty wealthy yourself. I'm comfortable. But why didn't you tell us? Jessica asked. Why did you let us think you needed our help? Because I wanted to see what kind of help you were really offering. The room went very quiet. Jessica stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I don't understand. Jessica, every conversation we've had since your father died has been about getting me to sell my house and move somewhere that would be more convenient for you to manage my affairs. You've never once asked me what I want or what would make me happy. That's not true, isn't it? Name one time in the past 3 months when you've asked me how I'm feeling, or what my plans are, or what I need from you as my daughter. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Every phone call has been about money. Every visit has been about real estate. Every suggestion has been about what would be best for your future inheritance. Mom, that's not fair. We were trying to help. Help me do what? Get out of your way so you wouldn't have to worry about me anymore? Jessica started crying then, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of frustration and anger. You don't understand the stress we've been under, she said. Worrying about you, trying to figure out how to take care of you, wondering if we'd have to support you financially. Support me financially? Jessica, I never asked you for money. I never asked you to take care of me. I never asked you to manage my life. but you're our responsibility now." And there it was. The truth she'd been hiding behind all her concern and planning. "No, I'm not. I'm 62 years old. I'm in good health, and I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." Brad cleared his throat. "Margaret, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. We're just trying to make sure you're set up for success." "Success at what? Dying conveniently? That's not what we meant." "Then what did you mean? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been counting my money and planning my funeral since the day Robert died." Jessica was crying harder now. "You're being cruel." "I'm being honest. There's a difference." I sat back down at the table and looked at both of them. "Jessica, I love you. I love Brad. And I love those boys more than anything in the world. But I will not be managed like a financial asset. I will not be relocated for your convenience. And I will not pretend that your concern for my welfare is anything other than concern for your inheritance. So you're just going to give everything to charity out of spite. I'm going to give my money to organizations that will use it to help people, yes. And it's not out of spite. It's because I've realized that having money you didn't earn doesn't make you a better person. If anything, it seems to make some people worse." Jessica stood up abruptly. "Fine. If that's how you want it, fine. But don't expect us to keep worrying about you." "I don't." "And don't expect us to keep visiting all the time." "I won't." "And don't expect us to take care of you when you get old and sick and can't manage on your own anymore." I looked at her for a long moment. "Jessica, you haven't taken care of me a single day since you moved out of this house 18 years ago. I don't expect you to start now." They left that afternoon. No goodbye hugs, no promises to call soon. Jessica packed her laptop with the retirement community brochures she'd never gotten to show me. Brad gathered up his real estate analyses and financial projections that would never be used. Before they walked out the door, Jessica turned back to me one more time. "You know, Dad always said you were stronger than you looked." I guess he was right. "Your father was a smart man. But he was also wrong about something. You're not stronger than you look. You're colder." After they left, I sat in Robert's recliner and thought about that. Was I cold? Or was I just finally warm enough to stop needing other people's approval to survive? A week later, Helen's lawyer called to let me know that the estate had been settled. Jessica had received her $100,000, and $50,000 had been put into accounts for each of the boys. The lawyer also mentioned that Helen had left one more surprise. A letter for me that was only to be delivered after everything else had been settled. The letter was short and written in Helen's shaky handwriting. "Margaret, if you're reading this, then everything went according to plan. Robert told me about Jessica's phone calls and visits, and we both agreed that money shows people's true character faster than anything else. I hope you'll use your gift to live the life you want, not the life other people think you should have. And I hope you'll remember that family isn't always the people you're related to. Sometimes it's the people who actually care about your happiness. Love, Helen." 6 months later. I'm still in my house on Maple Street. I've had the roof repaired and the furnace serviced. I've hired a young man from down the street to help with the yard work. I've joined a book club at the library and started taking watercolor classes at the community center. Jessica and I talk once a month. Brief conversations that stay carefully focused on safe topics like the weather and the boys' grades in school. She never asks how I'm doing, and I never volunteer the information. But I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Last month, I drove up to the cottage in Colorado for the first time. It's beautiful, nestled in the mountains beside a stream that babbles day and night. Robert's fishing gear is still there, along with photo albums full of pictures of him with Helen during their summer visits over the years. I'm thinking about spending the whole summer there next year. Maybe I'll learn to fish.